What terrifies a manipulator the most? It's not when the person they once controlled walks away. It's when that person stands before them, calm, silent, unshaken, and looks them in the eye with the quiet of someone who has seen through every game and has nothing left to prove. Now imagine this. They've just delivered another grand performance, switching from the victim to the accuser, blaming, pleading, twisting the script like they always have. But this time, you don't react. No panic. No need to soothe. No anger. You just stand there, still as a mountain in the storm, unmoved. And in that moment, a part of them knows, the game is over. Not because you shouted, but because you didn't respond. Because you're no longer hooked by any of the emotional strings they used to pull you under. This is their greatest fear. Not your physical departure, but your psychological emancipation. The moment you stop needing to explain, to fix, to apologize for wounds you never inflicted. When you finally understand, you owe no one the destruction of your peace to make them feel comfortable. That's when they play their final card. No more threats. No more pretending to be noble. They collapse, or at least pretend to. Their voice trembles. I can't live without you. And for a moment, your heart wants to flinch, like it used to. But you are no longer who you once were. Epictetus wrote, "We are disturbed not by what happens, but by the meaning we assign to it." And now, you assign new meaning. That desperate plea, you don't hear it with blind compassion anymore, but with the clarity of someone who once mistook pity for love. The narcissist knows they've lost all control, except for one last hope, that you still want to be seen as the good one. But Stoic philosophy does not teach you to be good in the eyes of those who exploit your kindness. It teaches you to be right in the eyes of your own conscience, to sleep in peace, not because you pleased others, but because you kept your integrity. And when you say nothing, make no promise, don't look back, just walk away, a frightening truth begins to dawn on them. You're no longer a pawn in their game. You are the player, and they have no rules left to bind you. Manipulators, no matter how subtle, all make the same mistake. They believe that once you've bowed your head, even just once, they can make you do it forever. They believe that if they plant enough guilt, enough regret, enough nostalgia in you, you'll come back. That if they wait long enough, you'll soften. You'll forget the moments you were dismissed, bent, or had your own emotions turned against you. But they forget one thing: there is no pain that deepens a soul more than the betrayal from someone you once thought was safe. And it's from that sacred trust that they began building their game, not with shouting or violence, but with a slow, insidious erosion of your self-trust. They made you question your instincts, feel guilty for setting boundaries, believe that if something felt wrong, it must be your fault. You once tolerated, you stayed silent, you tried to understand, you replayed the same questions in your mind. Am I being too sensitive? Am I overreacting? But then one day, you ran out of energy to keep analyzing. No more strength to carry it all. No more desire to be understood or validated. You only longed for peace. Not to win. Not to lose. Just to be, without being manipulated, without being controlled. And that was the beginning of freedom. Marcus Aurelius called it inner sovereignty. When you stop living in reaction and begin living from intention. When your peace no longer depends on anyone changing, because it no longer lives in their hands. And in that moment, the manipulator's power dissolves. With no one left to control, they become empty. With no one to torment, they are forced to face the chaos within themselves, the very storm they've spent a lifetime avoiding by controlling others. But they don't surrender easily. That's when the final game begins. They no longer try to win your love. They try to make you feel wrong. You'll be called cold, heartless, selfish, not because you did anything cruel, but because you stopped obeying. Seneca once wrote, Nothing angers a tyrant more than someone who no longer fears punishment. And when you stop reacting, stop arguing, stop explaining, you sever the energy that once fed their control. But this final game isn't about love. It's about planting a single, lingering doubt. What if I was the problem? Because they know, if you start questioning yourself, if you feel guilty, if you begin to regret, they'll have a small crack in the door, just wide enough to step through, to take control, one more time. But if you can hold on to that clarity, if you can face the guilt without letting it control you, then you've already won. Not because you walked away, but because you walked away with your dignity intact. And that is the one thing they were never prepared to face. Under the harsh light of awakening, you begin to see clearly. Not all relationships are built on love. Many are structured on power, control, and dependency, disguised as kindness. Toxic relationships aren't always romantic. Sometimes they come from the ones you trust most, the ones you once called family, colleague, or the person who helped you so much. And that's what makes them even harder to walk away from. When a manipulator doesn't rely on love to keep you close, they use moral debt. They remind you that without them, you wouldn't be where you are now, that they were there when you fell. They plant in your mind a warped sense of gratitude, as if their help came with an unspoken contract that you must now forever be loyal, silent, obedient. They don't need your love. They only need you to fear losing them. That's a kind of manipulation deeper than emotional. It's moral manipulation. And when you start to sense it, they can feel it. You don't need to say it out loud. Just stop apologizing every time you disagree. Stop tiptoeing to avoid hurting them. Start asking questions. Suddenly, they're no longer your protector. They become the controller. They demand loyalty with loaded reminders. They juggle guilt and obligation like weapons. No shouting. No threats. Just silence, and a look that makes you feel like you betrayed them just for needing space to breathe. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The one who does wrong harms himself. The one who acts unjustly makes himself evil. But the one who endures injustice without speaking, becomes its accomplice." Manipulators never admit they're wrong. They simply make you feel that leaving them is wrong. And for those taught from childhood to never be ungrateful, to keep the peace at all costs, to place loyalty above truth, this becomes a quiet, deadly trap. You start to drift in a gray zone, not sure who's right or wrong. You're not hit, not yelled at, not abandoned. But you're also not free to be yourself. You're loved conditionally, as long as you comply. Stay quiet and protect the image they've built. It's a prison wrapped in praise and gratitude. And when you tear down that wall, not with rage, but with resolve, you don't just free yourself. You break a cycle you were never meant to carry. But they won't let you go quietly, because if you leave with clarity, they lose control. And worse, they're forced to face the truth they've denied all along. They are not the good person they believe they are. They'll play their final card. They'll rewrite the story in their version. You're the ungrateful one, the one who twisted the truth, the one who bit the hand that fed you. They don't do it out of heartbreak. They do it out of fear. Because if your truth is heard, they lose the one thing they value more than truth itself: a good reputation. Epictetus once said, "If you wish to grow, be ready to be laughed at, slandered, misunderstood. Let none of it stop you from becoming free." You no longer blame them, but you no longer protect them either. You choose to walk away, not for revenge, but to end a cycle you were never meant to inherit. Endings in these kinds of relationships are never clean. There are no clear goodbyes, no official full stop. Instead, there's a long, slow fading, a quiet retreat that begins the moment you stop reacting the way you used to. You no longer fake a smile to keep the peace. You no longer swallow your pain just because the insult came wrapped in polite words. And then, you realize, They haven't let you go, because the final game doesn't happen while you're still inside the relationship. It only begins the moment you think you've left. That's when they go to the people around you, colleagues, family, friends. They tell stories, not about what they did, but about how you suddenly changed, became cold, forgot how to be grateful. They don't attack you, they just gently imply that you are the problem. And the deepest wound doesn't come from what they say, but from the silence of those who once stood beside you. When you start to notice the doubting glances, the avoidance, when you feel you have to explain yourself for things you never did wrong, when you start to wonder, was I too harsh? Was I ungrateful? This is the turning point, because nothing crumbles a newly freed mind faster than the feeling of isolation. And that's where Stoicism, not just as a philosophy, but as a lived practice, becomes a lifeline. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Remember, you can endure anything. If you don't convince yourself that you can't, you start learning how to stand alone, not with pride, but with clarity. You stop justifying. Stop sending long messages trying to explain why you left, because now you understand. Those who don't want to understand never will, no matter how many times you try. And those who wish to manipulate will always twist the truth, until they come out looking like the victim. The manipulator no longer needs your affection. They only need the world to never see them for who they truly are. And what terrifies them isn't that you walked away, but that you now have the power to tell the story in the light of truth. They'll try to guilt you for your silence. They'll use others to echo their message, you shouldn't speak up. You'll make things worse. But you've learned something every long-time survivor of manipulation must learn: silence is not always noble. Sometimes it is a form of complicity. Seneca once said, "A noble soul does not fear solitude. It fears only one thing, to betray the truth within." And now, you no longer seek agreement. You seek truth. You seek alignment between courage and compassion. A compassion that no longer self-destructs. That no longer bows to what is wrong. Maybe no one will take your side right away. Maybe no one will understand why you left. But that no longer matters, because you don't need the crowd to validate what is right. You only need one thing: a soul no longer chained to fear. And it's in this very phase, when you are no longer with them, but their residue still clings, that you begin to see, what truly exhausted you wasn't what they did. It was how you kept responding to it. Not the criticism, but the compulsion to please. Not the blame, but the way you felt guilty for standing up for yourself. A part of you is still unfamiliar with silence that carries no fault. It feels suffocating, because you were once taught, if someone is sad, if someone is hurt, if someone is angry, you must have done something wrong. So now, even after breaking free, your mind still reflexively asks, was I too harsh? Did I hurt them? This isn't weakness. It's the echo of someone who's lived too long in a landscape of conditioning, where kindness was measured by how much of yourself you were willing to sacrifice. But here, right here, lies your chance to be reborn, not through resistance, but through no longer needing to resist. When you stop trying to be understood, stop trying to be proven right, stop trying to be forgiven, and simply live, honestly, clearly, as who you are. Epictetus once said, "You cannot control what others think, but you can completely control how you choose to live." And now, you begin to choose differently, not reacting out of habit, but responding with awareness. No longer saying yes to keep the peace, but saying no to keep your dignity. No longer letting other people's emotions dictate your worth, because now you understand. If someone requires your self-destruction in order to preserve the relationship, then that relationship is slowly killing you. The final move of the manipulator isn't just to lie about you to others. It's to make you doubt yourself. They don't need you to come back. They just need you not to move forward. They don't need to make you sit down. They just need you to never fully stand up. And this is where Stoic philosophy stops being words in a book. It becomes your breath, your spine, because one day, you will meet them again, or someone like them. In another form, a new friend, a colleague, a family member, and you won't need to overanalyze. You'll simply feel it, because once your mind has been cleared of the fog, you no longer mistake chaos for normal. You won't need to fight them. You'll simply refuse to enter their stage. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the best revenge is not to be like them. Not silence, but no need to retaliate. No screaming to be believed. Just living, transparently, calmly, and entirely free. Freedom doesn't come from cutting ties with a person. It comes from cutting the need for approval from those who were never sincere with you. You move on, not because you've fully healed, but because now you no longer need someone to break you, to prove that you were already strong. When you move on and never look back, it's not because resentment has faded, but because you realize, resentment is the final thread still tying you to what once hurt you. Forgiveness, in Stoic philosophy, doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means refusing to let what happened keep occupying your mind. And this is something manipulators will never understand. They believe power lies in controlling others. But Stoic wisdom teaches the opposite. Real power is mastering yourself. Even when someone tries to manipulate you, you no longer need to prove anything. You don't need to win. You simply refuse to be dragged into a war where the only real loss is yourself. In their final move, the manipulator isn't just trying to break you. They're trying to turn you into them. Cold, distrustful, closed off. Because if you become bitter, if you become cynical, then in their eyes, they've won. They've twisted your spirit to match their own. You're no longer living from your values. You're only reacting. And that is where the real test begins. Who will you become after the damage? Will you harden your heart so much that trust dies with it? Or will you choose the harder path, to remain open, still human, still kind, but no longer naive, to still believe in connection, but now with boundaries, to still be good, but no longer easily used? Epictetus said, distinguish what is in your control and what is not. Clarity begins there, and the deepest clarity comes when you finally see, they have no power anymore, except the power you once gave them, in your own mind. So, you begin to clean house. You shed the old guilt disguised as loyalty. You stop forcing yourself to stay connected to people who exhaust you, just because they were once kind. You realize, a kind act in the past is not a lifetime license to cause pain in the present. This is the final purification. When you carry no debt, no hunger to be understood, no reflex to defend, you begin to walk in true emotional freedom. And when the manipulator sees you no longer reacting, no longer triggered by their emotional pokes, no longer reflecting their ego, they panic or disappear. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're no longer controllable. And to them, that's a devastating loss. Seneca said, those who've been deeply hurt forgive quickly, but never forget. But Stoicism teaches one step further. You don't need to rush forgiveness. You don't need to forget. You only need to stop reacting, to stop letting them shape your mood, your breath, your path. And so, you walk away, not because you're cold, but because you've finally grown warm enough toward yourself, to stop accepting coldness from those who never understood what love truly means. And then, in the days that followed, when you've gone far enough not to hear their voice anymore, but still close enough to feel the echo, you begin to understand a profound truth. What once imprisoned you wasn't their words or their actions. It was the story you believed about yourself. They made you believe you couldn't stand alone, that without them, you'd be lost, weak, easily broken. They planted in you the image of someone who always needed guidance, saving, fixing. And the most terrifying part is that you once believed it. But then one day, You wake up without them, without instruction, without validation, except for the quiet stillness of your own breath, and you realize, everything is still okay. You're still breathing, still living, still moving forward without shrinking under someone's gaze. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." So you look inward, no longer searching for the flaws in their behavior, no longer obsessed with the question, why are they like this? You understand, the manipulator needs no more analysis. They are who they are. And now, you must decide, will you continue building your life on the foundation of their lies? Or will you choose temporary loneliness, in order to create a life that's finally real? And in that light, something strange begins to happen. You no longer feel anger toward them, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you no longer want to carry them with you, like someone who's been walking around with a heavy stone in their coat pocket, thinking it was part of them, until they set it down, and realized, they've been lighter all along. That's not forgiveness. That's liberation. The manipulator may no longer be there, but now, you must face an even more dangerous enemy, the shadow they left in your mind, a voice that whispers you're selfish, that you're too harsh, that you don't know how to maintain relationships. Make no mistake, that voice is not your conscience. It's the echo of the unconscious training you were once subjected to. Epictetus once warned, it's not the chains outside us that bind us, but the chains inside our minds. And now, you begin unlocking them. One by one, you allow yourself to stop feeling guilty for protecting your boundaries. You no longer apologize for placing your mental well-being first. You stop calling someone's behavior normal just because you've endured it for too long. You learn to say no without explaining, to walk away without needing approval, to stay silent, not out of fear, but because you no longer wish to waste your breath on falsehoods. It's not that you've become cold. It's that you've become clear. What the manipulator fears most is not your anger. They've survived that. They've controlled that. What they cannot control is your calm indifference. When you hear their name, see their face, and no longer shake on the inside, this nullification, not through hatred, but through transcendence, is what they'll never be able to accept, because it means they are no longer the center of your mind. When a manipulator realizes their power no longer works, they don't give up. They change weapons. This time, they don't come with rage, but with fragility. Not with shouting, but with sighs. Not with threats, but with something far more insidious, a carefully crafted weakness. A manipulator isn't just a tyrant. They're also a gifted actor. When the wit no longer makes you bow, they dress themselves in the costume of a victim, blaming the world, their past, and even you, but never once blaming themselves. They speak of deep wounds inflicted by someone else, to justify why they're hurting you today. They remind you of the things they've done for you, but never once mention the price you paid in silence. And if your heart has ever known how to trust, you are the most fertile ground for their lies to take root. Because manipulators don't exploit stupidity, they exploit kindness. As Epictetus wrote, we are not troubled by events, but by the way we perceive them. They know that, and they don't control you through force, but through emotional activation. They make you feel you must do something, that you owe them something, that you're responsible for their collapse. This is where the strength of a free soul is tested most brutally. Not when you're insulted, but when you're pleaded with, when the one who once controlled you now curls up, crying, begging, and pleading for forgiveness. But here's the truth you must hold on to. A manipulator doesn't grieve the loss of you. They grieve the loss of control over you. Their pain is not the pain of the heart, but the agony of a dying ego. They don't miss you. They miss the power they had over you. They miss your reactions, your explanations, your anger, because all of it signaled to them that they still mattered. But when you go quiet, when you no longer react, when you stop trying to understand, to fix, to save something that was never truly yours to carry, that's when they fall. They no longer hold a place in your universe. They are no longer the center, no longer the gravity pulling you back. Marcus Aurelius once reminded us, freedom isn't found outside of us, but in our own self-command. And in the moment you remain unmoved, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. You finally walk past their last performance, not with a harsh rejection, but with awakening. Not by proving who's right or wrong, but by no longer playing the game at all. A person may be fragile, but when that fragility is used over and over to hurt others, it's no longer a wound, it becomes a weapon. This is what Stoic philosophy teaches. You cannot control another person's behavior, but you can decide how much access you allow them to your inner world. And now, you've mastered the art of not resisting with rage, but by severing, quietly, completely, and for good. When the manipulator realizes that their display of weakness no longer stirs compassion in you, they resort to something even more insidious, fragmentation. No longer the victim, no longer the aggressor. They become a shattered mirror, reflecting the broken pieces of you, of them, and of hundreds of distorted realities. They plant doubt, not in their own mind, but in yours. Am I being too rigid? Have I become too cold? Is it possible that I'm part of the problem too? This is one of the final and most dangerous games of the manipulator, to make you doubt yourself, after they've already failed to scare you, or win your pity. Seneca once wrote, "No one can wound you more deeply than your own thoughts about yourself." And it's precisely here that the manipulator finds the last crack, the place still unhealed, the memory left unnamed, the child within you still waiting for some long-lost validation. They don't need to push you, they just need to whisper, "Are you really as strong as you think?" And if you've ever survived emotional harm, you know, those questions don't come from logic. They come from old contractions. From the fear of being left. From the habit of needing to be good enough to stay. Manipulators know this. They know that a mind conditioned to please others will always question its own right to walk away. And that's when you need philosophy like a blade, not to wound, but to cut through. Not everyone deserves your explanation. Not everyone is safe enough to be trusted with your depth. You don't need to argue with those who've already decided not to understand. You don't need to blame yourself just because someone else resents your boundaries. And you certainly don't need to keep someone in your life just because they once hurt you in a pitiful way. In a world where everyone is desperate to be seen, a new kind of darkness has emerged, those who exploit empathy as a form of power. Modern emotional manipulators aren't loud or obvious. They're dressed in the language of healing. They use words like wounded, healing, ancestral trauma to blur the line between depth and toxicity. They say connection to access your most private places. They say spirituality to excuse their lack of accountability. They speak the language of light, while hiding a shadow they've never dared to face. But true light, as Marcus Aurelius once said, comes from looking at yourself honestly and without disguise. And when you begin to see clearly, the game ends, not with a fight, but with a quiet answer rising from within. I am no longer here to be pulled like a puppet. No one can manipulate a mind that has learned to stand alone. No one can control a soul that has made peace with being misunderstood. You once sought clarity from others, but now you know, clarity doesn't come from what they say. It comes from the silence you choose. And from that moment on, you no longer need them to admit their faults. You don't need their apology. You don't need their change. You just need to keep walking, and never look back. No longer the victim. No longer the warrior. Simply a human being, whole, sovereign, and beyond control. Epictetus once emphasized, we cannot control external events, but we can always control our response. And this is the core truth that terrifies the manipulator the most. When you stop reacting, you take back the reins. Once you realize that you are no longer bound by memories, guilt, or the hope that one day they might change, you step into a different realm, a space where games no longer exist, only presence remains. At that moment, the manipulator becomes deeply unsettled, not because you've left them, but because you no longer let them define you. You're no longer the one who must understand, must empathize, must endlessly listen. You've become unreadable, a freedom they cannot grasp. And it is precisely this incomprehensibility that frightens them, because an independent soul cannot be predicted, cannot be controlled, and cannot be manipulated through pity. Here, you begin to see the true nature of the power you once handed over. Not something they took from you, but something you surrendered too easily, in the name of preserving connection. But the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius never spoke of preserving connection at all costs. It speaks of preserving yourself, at all costs. You may still carry love, you may still wish them peace, but you no longer choose to stay and witness the cycle repeat, because the game only exists if you remain on the board. And once you withdraw your mind, the game collapses, not with a crash, but with irrelevance. When a soul becomes untouchable, no accusation can shake it, no memory can be weaponized, and no guilt can pull it back into the old cycle. That person no longer needs to explain, no longer needs to prove their truth, no longer needs to respond to distortions. They do not walk away in anger, they do not remain silent out of bitterness. They are simply awake. And with that awakening comes a powerful gentleness, an unshaken gaze, non-judgmental, but no longer easy to manipulate, a heart that still feels the pain of others, but no longer loses itself because of it. Epictetus once taught, the free person is not the one who has no master, but the one who cannot be mastered. True liberation is clarity. It is steadiness. It is the moment you realize you no longer have to resist anyone, because there's no part of you left for them to control. That's when the final game ends. Not because you won, but because you're no longer playing. If these words left you in quiet stillness, not because of pain, but because you recognize them in your own story, don't leave just yet. There's more waiting to be named, more you deserve to understand, more healing you were never meant to do alone. Subscribe to the channel, so this journey back to yourself doesn't have to be one you walk alone.